Creativity is the fundamental factor in today's economy, and people are the source of creativity. Without an ample supply of creative people, your economy today simply will not grow. And people, especially well-educated, creative people, today are more mobile than ever. Our options for where to live are expanding. They are expanding even beyond our national borders. The international flows of people have never been greater, and great places are magnets for great people, and great people make great places. So economic development strategy in America is really expanding and changing. It's evolving very fast to sort of capture and act on these new truths in terms of how our economy works, because traditionally we've thought that economic success depended on maybe what's under the ground beneath us, the oil, the gas, the minerals, or it depended on the traditional infrastructure. Do you have the expressway? Do you have the roads? Sort of an interesting sideline on that. The Milken Institute this year looked at the cities that were producing the most jobs. And the number one city in America was, they may know, was Bentonville, Arkansas. Well, there's a reason for that. Walmart is in Bentonville, Arkansas. Boo, I agree. But also in Bentonville, Arkansas, there are two other Fortune 500 companies. One is Tyson Foods, and the other is J.B. Hunt. Interesting story. J.B. Hunt, a trucking firm, right? Located in Bentonville, Arkansas, before Bentonville, Arkansas had an expressway. Think about that. So traditional infrastructure doesn't even play the same role that it used to play in economic development. It doesn't even depend, your economic success doesn't even depend long-term on the presence of big corporations. If you've ever read Jim Collins' Built to Last, or way back when, Robert Waterman and Tom Peters' book, In Search of Excellence, you know that the people, the companies that are held up as sort of paragons of success and smarts eventually become the fallen angels. And so even the presence of big corporations doesn't quite do it in terms of economic success. And economic success certainly, surely does not depend on traditional tax breaks and freezes. In a race for smart, talented people, in a world where small business creates 80% of the jobs in this country, it's really hard to understand what good typical tax incentives are that encourage big businesses to move from one place to another. And by the way, not much of that happens in this country. How many Boeings move from Seattle to Chicago in a year? One, maybe. I mean, on some level, tax breaks and incentives, I'm not saying you should never use them, they shouldn't be part of your package, but at some level, there's simply a penalty on individuals, talented, creative people, because if business is not paying, somebody's paying. And there's certainly a penalty on small businesses. And last time I checked, basically small businesses pay their taxes. So you really have to think about how you have to think and rethink economic development strategy given the changes in our economy. British author Charles Landry, who I call a friend, put it this way in his book, Creative City, The Creative City. Human cleverness, desires, motivations, imagination, and creativity are replacing location, natural resources, and market assets as urban resources. And then he writes, the creativity of those who live in and run cities will determine their future success. I think that's a provocative thought. And what Charles is saying is very straightforward, and it's enormously challenging. Basically, what Charles is saying is your creativity will determine the success of Pensacola. There's nothing in the air, there's nothing in the ground, there's nothing that says Pensacola has to be a certain way. This is your fate. You are in charge of Pensacola's fate. So any city can win, any city can lose, and success is essentially up to us. But it's not easy. Again, we're all trying to figure out this new economy because it keeps throwing us these curveballs, right? I mean, we're in a jobless recovery. What does that mean? I don't know. We are now at risk of losing 14 million jobs to offshoring. That's 11% of American jobs. New study out from Berkeley. So it seems to me that in a world where a $60,000 to $80,000 a year programming job in the States can be moved offshore to Bangalore and command $6,000 to $11,000, I'm not sure what the answer is other than creativity, other than innovation, other than invention. I don't know what we do. I think it's no longer worth debating. I think the only option for us is to invent our way toward a new future, a new economic future. And let me say that even just this week, Sunday in the Boston Globe, some of you may have seen it because it certainly went through my email a couple of times. There's been a lot of recent criticism about Richard Florida's work, and I know he was here and I know he was a big hit, but my guess is some people walked away and went about Richard, because that's kind of what's going on. Well, I want you to forget, just forget the controversial parts of Richard's argument. Forget that the definition of his definition of creative class is improbably broad. Hairdressers and accountants, I'm not sure all belong in the creative class. I'm not sure. The idea even of class offends some people, understandably so. Forget that. Just forget it. Forget the assertion that the number of gays in your community determines how tolerant you are. But forget it. If that bothers you, just forget it. My colleague Joe Courtwright, economist Joe Courtwright in Portland, has found, looking at kind of deeper, drilling down into those numbers, really believes that actually the presence of gays correlates more to the presence of young people in a community. It's really a function of how many young people. Why? Because young people are more likely to admit that they are living with a same-sex partner, right? So we're not even sure what that means. Just forget it. If that bothers you, forget it. Forget the idea that the quality of primary and secondary schools doesn't matter. Forget that, because they do. I think there's just a matter of emphasis there. They do matter, and I'll tell you why I know. Forget this idea that young people prefer gritty cities. That's not true. And forget that sort of the basic idea, the basic fundamentals of running government, clean and safe, don't matter to young people or the creative class. They do matter. So that's just not so. But it doesn't matter that Richard maybe got it partially wrong, or maybe you could argue with emphasis, despite what Joel Kotkin and others are writing, because the essence of Richard's argument is right on. And so is Ray Gendros when he says that dense, mixed-use, human-scale, walkable communities attract people. They do. Ray is right. So instead of arguing about these things, instead of debating these things, we need to get on with it. And, it's sort of easy to talk about it, and it's really easy to debate it, but it's hard to do it. It's hard as hell to do it. So, how do we move forward? How do we make our cities smart? How do we make our cities successful? How do we harness creativity? Well, I want to talk about a few things. It's certainly not the whole package, but I want to talk about a few things tonight. First, we have to attract and retain creative people. And that's sort of self-evident. We've been talking about it. But I want to emphasize to you that that means in particular that we need to attract young people, especially attract or retain, or both, probably, 25 to 34-year-olds. They are a critical economic asset, made more so by the fact that college participation rates and women's labor force participation rates are leveling off. 25 to 34-year-olds, think about it. They are the most currently educated among us. They start families late, so they work like Trojans. And so they're like a human resources person's dream, right? The problem is this. In 2000, the U.S. had 4 million fewer 25 to 34-year-olds than we did in 1990. And what happened in that decade is 2/3 of the top 50 metro areas actually lost 25 to 34-year-olds. What happened is 25 to 34-year-olds, because they're mobile, because they're a lot more mobile than I was, they are like lemmings and they're collecting in a few cities. You know, like attract like. I think it's a gene pool thing. Anyway, but we have to find ways to attract them. You need to understand they're the most mobile in our society. In 1999, 34% of 20 to 29-year-olds moved, 22% of 30 to 34-year-olds moved. So if Pensacola wants to attract creatives, then you need to attract them while they're young, because that's when they're moving. Now, there are exceptions to that, but basically, you've got to attract them while they're young. And a growing list of economists predict that as the economy recovers, then access to talent is likely to be the most important constraint on economic development. So we have to have talent to make a creative economy run. And yet, think about it. This demographic group is least likely to be considered in civic decision makers, in civic decision making. Who does City Hall think about? They think about property owners. They think about homeowners. They think about, you know, who's paying the property tax, who's coming down here and fussing about schools, right? I mean, so who's the chamber thinking about? They're not thinking about 25 to 34-year-olds. They're thinking about middle-aged white men who make location decisions. So the problem is, you know, it's like 25 to 34-year-olds are really important. These are the people who are moving. They're making decisions. They're choosing your town or not your town. Who's paying attention to them? If Pensacola's like most towns I visit, nobody. And that's wrong. And you need to get them on the civic agenda, and you need to figure out what they want. And the problem is most 50-year-olds can't figure out what 25 to 34-year-olds want, so you got to ask them, you got to observe them. But I see in the room some 25 to 34-year-olds, which is good. Yay. Everybody 25 to 34 years old, raise your hand. All right, this is good. Oh, come on, wait a minute. Now, if you feel like you're 25 to 34 years old, you don't count. Anyway, this is good. This is great. In fact, this is great. This is rare. Pensacola, give yourself a thumbs up on that, because that is unusual that in a room like this, you would have young people represented, and they are a resource. Don't let them get out of the room without asking them something. So what do cities have to do to attract young people? I've had the opportunity over the last 4 weeks. If I look a little tired, I am, because for the last 4 weeks I've been on the road conducting focus groups with 25 to 34-year-olds in 6 cities around the country: Providence, Rhode Island, Tampa Bay, Philadelphia, Portland, Richmond, and Memphis. And I've been mainly listening to 25 to 34-year-olds and what they want. And it's been a fascinating project. And I could do a whole thing on that, but I won't. But it's clear that there are some things, going from very different, Tampa Bay is a very different place than Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, right? Real different. And Portland is different still. Okay, and Richmond is real different. But there are common themes among them. And they want exactly what Ray Gendros is trying to deliver to your town. They want vibrant, energetic places where they can, where young people can see other people, where they can feel the energy, where they can feel the life. That's really important. They want places to gather, like bars and restaurants and your great sidewalk cafes. That's wonderful. It brings energy to the street. They want plenty of things to do. They want arts. They want sports. They want easy to get to outdoor recreation areas. They have to be able to find each other. How many of you have been involved in either downtown redevelopment or the historic district redevelopment? Bought a house, lived there, done a business? Great. Okay, I applaud you, because it really is impressive. you are doing good stuff here, and it's visible, and it makes an impression, and it's going to make an impression on newcomers. And so you got the physical thing going. I mean, obviously, there's more to do. You know, there's always more to do, but you're moving in the right direction. We're going to talk about the culture. I want to talk about the culture because the culture is harder to move sometimes than the physical part of things, but you're making the right moves physically. I want to tell you a funny story that comes to mind. I was in, I guess, probably an unnamed city earlier this week doing focus groups, and just for a lark, I said, well, look, if the city were a car, what car would it be? And so they all sort of looked puzzled, and one lady spoke up very confidently, and she said, an El Camino. I said, an El Camino? What is it? She said, an El Camino because this city can't decide what it wants to be. And I said, well, and everybody laughed, and the heads started nodding, and, the head started nodding, and it was like, and I thought, oh my gosh, I was in the fifth city and, in a short amount of time, and I thought, bingo, she said it. And it totally resonated with the people in that room. And it's so captured what young people, and I think what all of us really are looking for in cities. And Wendy, I mean, you run a leadership program. They're looking for leadership. They're looking for decisiveness. They're looking for direction. They're looking for focus. They want to know that, okay, choose it. Do you choose sprawl or do you choose downtown development? Because you can't have both. Do you want density or do you want sprawl? What do you want? Do you want a tolerant community that welcomes newcomers, or do you want to keep it the way it's always been and the old people in charge? What do you want? Pick it. Or you're going to be at El Camino. And I thought, okay, I got it. And so it's a really, that for me, I'm not going to carry that forever. The El Camino example. Anyway, so you're the first to hear it. And I'll tell you something else. There's one more thing about these 25 to 34-year-olds because I think it's really important. Inevitably, there's so much to say. I haven't even summarized my notes just yet. I've just pretty much written them. But this whole notion of being in places that are not finished, it's very powerful. Being in places they feel they can make a difference. Very powerful. Being in places where they are invited to be themselves and be part of the change in a community, very powerful. And you know what? I think mid-sized cities like this one have so much more opportunity to offer that than New York and Philadelphia and, places that sometimes can seem so overwhelming, D.C., those Atlanta, those are successful cities. Yes, they're successful cities. But I think there's something stirring right now in this country where people really want to make a difference, young people want to make a difference. And so the city, I think one of the keys to being a smart city today is finding ways for young people to be able to be invited in, not necessarily, they don't necessarily want to be a member of the Rotary Club, okay? They don't necessarily want the old style civic institutions. So you even have to be willing to change the table, if you will. But cities that are willing to do that, I think, are going to be successful and really have an advantage. I want to talk a minute about place. It's something that Ray has, I know, worked with you on. Place is critical for many reasons, but it's critical to status. Who we are and how others judge us. And I think place is especially critical to young people, especially early in their careers. Frances Mays in Under the Tuscan Sun wrote, "Where you are is who you are." And I think it certainly influences what others think about you. So I think we have to brand our cities in ways that convey status to those who live there. One of the things, again, people want to be proud of their city. Even the cynics among us want to feel proud. But sometimes you have to remind people, you have to give them reasons to be proud. You have to remind them of what is good about the city. And again, back to the El Camino example, you can't be fearful about making choices. If you strip out the word, so many city brands are so poorly done. I mean, there aren't many that are well done because mostly you can strip off the name of the city, stick another city on, and it sounds just about as right because you're unwilling to make choices. If I were thinking about Pensacola, and it's not like I have a lot, so I'm just a total rank amateur here, but world-class thinkers in Pensacola, I'd build on that. That's something you can say, and it's reality, and then it provides a halo effect for a lot of other things. So I think when you're thinking about the story, the brand, think about the story that people will actually tell about Pensacola, because that's really, you can put something on a banner and you can put it in an ad and all that's fine and good, but what really gives power to a city brand is the story that the people of that city will tell other people. If you watch Demographic Movement, any of those of you who may have done that, what you start to see, it's funny in America, you'll start seeing one or two people, say, move from Memphis to Chicago. And then all of a sudden, there are all these people moving from Memphis to Chicago, and you're thinking, what's going on? Guess what's going on? Word of mouth. That's what's going on. I'm telling somebody, you know what? Hey, I moved to Chicago. Chicago's great. So if you are building a brand and going to build a powerful brand for your city, it better be around a story that the people of your city are willing to tell. So, again, we could talk about that a while too, but symbols are really important, and again, that's been brought home to me in a really strong way with these focus groups. Okay, let's say you've invested in making your city a great place, especially for young people, and let's say you've branded it as such. What else can you do to make your city smart? Well, I want to suggest that you ask yourselves a couple of questions. Number one, does Pensacola welcome new ideas? And number two, okay, maybe we need to get up every morning and ask that question. And then two, can new ideas move around Pensacola very quickly? An economy that's based on ideas is different than an economy based on stuff. Ideas happen in particular places as a result of social interactions, so place profoundly matters. And as Ken and I were discussing today, place, one of the reasons geography is so powerful is because culture is attached to geography, and he's so right. And places that are receptive to new ideas have an advantage. I want you to think about this. Forget everybody holding hands and swinging and swaying, okay, and singing Kumbaya. That ain't it. Forget that. Places that are receptive to new ideas have an advantage because entrepreneurial activity does what? It creates jobs, right? Entrepreneurial activity is fundamentally about deviant behavior. Ken calls it mutant behavior. But think about it. It's absolutely true. An export economy is based on difference. Difference. Creativity is based on difference. Entrepreneurial activity is based on difference. Deviance. Now, if you're the kind of community that says, hey, we have to be standard, we all have to be the same, march in lockstep. it's really hard, for the deviants to surface, because what do the deviants do? They leave. They go to the next town, right? So there's an economic reason for tolerance. There's an economic reason for tolerating difference, because that's what entrepreneurial activity is about. So, ask yourselves, if Bill Gates had grown up in Pensacola instead of Seattle, would he have returned here to start his business as he did in Seattle? I think this is it. If Pensacola had been home to Sam Walton, would he have found a coffee shop on Main Street? Would he have found that great third place? I can't believe you're the home of the third place guru. Wow. Would he have found a great third place in which to raise venture capital? Because that's exactly what Sam Walton did. On Main Street in Bentonville is where he found his venture capital. Would that have happened in Pensacola? Are there third places where people can get together and meet up and share their deviant ideas? When someone asks, what if in Pensacola, what's the answer? Do people go, we tried that before. No, we tried that before. That won't work here. Because, reason number, I guarantee it's so funny in these focus groups. Everywhere I went, people say, you know what? X has the worst drivers in the country. I go to the next city. Well, Y has the worst drivers in the country, and then on and on. The point is, every city has the same set of problems. They vary a little bit, but everybody's got problems. And so you can either use the problems as an excuse never to do anything, or you can do what you can do and not what you can't. Okay? So the question is, if somebody says, what if in Pensacola? What happens? What's the reaction? I think that, the bigger you grow as a company, as an organization, as a city, and the further away you get from your entrepreneurial roots, then the more the leadership has to create an intentional yes culture. And I think certainly the same is true for cities, but it's much more difficult and a complex task to create and sustain an intentional culture in cities. So I would ask you this, is the serious business of Pensacola conducted in private exclusionary clubs? Is the status quo too closely guarded? Is there venture capital for new ideas? Is it difficult for women, minorities, gays, artists to get a serious hearing for their ideas? Are there a lot of civic rules? Are taxes punitive or government hard to deal with? Well, if so, then you need to change it. You need to make Pensacola a city that welcomes new ideas and new people with new ideas. And then you need to make sure that those ideas can move around quickly. Ken and I were talking today about John Seeley Brown, who was the chief scientist of Xerox and ran PARC, the Palo Alto Research Center. And he wrote a book called The Social Life of Information, and he talked about the fact that when he and his team would come up with new ideas in Palo Alto, they would just spin through PARC very, very quickly. But then getting them from PARC back across the nation, all the way back to Xerox headquarters, was next to impossible. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. In fact, it's a famous story, Xerox PARC invented the personal computer, but none of us are, operating with a Xerox personal computer today. There's a reason. Well, why was the information transfer so difficult? It was distance. Information and invention, it turns out, are sensitive to geography and the culture that is attached to geography and the cultural milieu that even density supports. Density is important. Connections are important. Places to gather are important. It's the proximity that allows conversations to take place, allows people to discover new things. It's always the core of economic development, and progress has always been as a result of this kind of connectivity. And I think the knowledge economy only intensifies this need. It's all about ideas. And if you want to move ideas fast, and connect ideas to other ideas and connect those ideas to money and people, then placemaking needs to support that process by providing ways for people and ideas to congregate. And again, I think that point was made so beautifully by Ray, way ahead of his time, pioneer thinking about this in his great book on the great good place. Did I get it right, Ray? And I always think about the great, basically coined the term third places. Think about it in the industrial age. Wealth was largely a product of how long you worked, how diligently you worked, and how much knowledge you brought to the job. It was sort of time multiplied by effort and multiplied by competence, and that's always going to be important. But today, wealth is much more a function of how creative am I? Well, can I reconceive what is there and come up with new solutions to problems? 2, how courageous am I? Am I willing to stand up and start something and experiment and fail? Can I build a coalition? Can I get resources? And 3, how connected am I? Am I connected to ideas outside and am I connected to the people inside? So the new formula, I think, is courage times creativity times connectivity. I think that's really at the heart of the success of the new economy. One of this state's deep and abiding advantages, I think, in this creativity game is the constant influx of newcomers. They are a challenge, I know that, but throughout history, it's been the outsider, the immigrant or the radical, who has been significant in pushing cities forward. If you read the great Peter Hall's book, Cities and Civilizations, he makes that point over and over. But I think therein lies a lesson. If it's the outsider who pushes cities forward, then it's very, very hard, impossible, to predict how and where it will happen. It's all about deviant behavior. So I think there are no best practices that you can simply, it's nice to study other cities and what works, but there are really no best practices that you can simply pick up through a visit and apply, or a consultant and apply, to your city. Just lay them on top of Pensacola and say they'll work here. I think what biology teaches us, what Silicon Valley teaches us, is that the way you find the next great thing is you need a lot of experimentation, you need a lot of diversity and a lot of variety, and then you step back, you watch, and you see what works and what doesn't work, and you invest in what works. Let me close with, I want to return to British author and friend Charles Landry. He writes that there are 6 ways to change behavior and mindset in a city, but only one can change cities for the long term, and that is to create and publicize aspirational models. Teresa Hines Carey, the very accomplished wife of Senator John Kerry and president of the Hines Endowment, likes to say, places become what people dream. And I would urge you to dream, and to dream big about Pensacola, and understand that what Pensacola becomes is very much in your hands. And I'll look forward to seeing what you can make of this city. So thank you very much. I'll be glad to answer any questions that anyone has.